Hello and welcome to this episode of Hospitality Talks, where I am joined by Steve Alton, who is the CEO of the BII. Steve, welcome to Hospitality Talks. And just for anyone out there who doesn't know who you or the BII are, could you give us a brief introduction, please?
Of course, Katy. Yeah. So I'm Steve Alton, as you say. I'm the Chief Exec of the British Institute of Innkeeping. So we're a membership organisation for individuals, predominantly individuals who are running amazing independent pubs across the UK. So 13,500 of them. And we support them with everything from practical day-to-day support to get them to navigate the challenge of running a modern pub business, everything from HR through legal, licensing, but also sharing great innovation and amazing ideas that brilliant operators have to drive growth, drive building brilliant teams, and ultimately, driving a fantastic guest experience as well, which is all about sustainable practice for great pubs. So yeah, we're very fortunate to see loads of great pubs through our awards. So Licensee of the Year award is obviously at the centre of that, and we just celebrated that at the BI summer event. But again, six amazing finalists and one brilliant winner with the Windsor Castle and Eamon and Arena doing some fantastic stuff, which we may touch on.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm a very proud judge of the Licensee of the Year Awards and trustee of the BII. So I'm very well aware of all of the great work that you guys do there. One of the most recent projects that we've worked on together was a research report with some insight for licensees, for publicans, that was focusing very much on the employee experience. And one of the stats that really stood out to me for that was that 86% of people who walk into our pubs believe that the teams, the staff, whatever you want to call them within a pub, can make or break their experience within that pub. How does that resonate with you from your experience of seeing probably even more pubs than I do on a weekly basis?
Well, no great surprise. I mean, brilliant pubs are all about brilliant people, and it's about that authentic connection. And I think why we as customers love, particularly independent pubs as well, is it's that cheers moment. That recognition, that being seen. Sometimes wanting to have a conversation, sometimes not. But more importantly, the team themselves know you. They know you, your background, your friends, your family, your challenges, and that's so important that you're going into that. So it's no great surprise. Great food and drink is kind of a given now. We've talked many times before about death of mediocrity, but whatever your offer is, just smash it. But actually, the bit you write about when you go and do that amazing review is the experience, and that experience is always about the interaction with a great team in a fantastic pub. So our winners, particularly of Licensee of the Year award, but our National Innovation in Training award as well, they put their people, at the heart of their offer, and you can see that in the energy. So when I go and visit these sites, you're greeted by every single team member, if that's front of house, back of house, that there's a real passion for what that pub is delivering and the connection it brings locally. And everybody's so bought in and invested in that as well. So yeah, it is the defining element of successful pubs.
And there are so many areas within the customer journey or the customer experience where if teams are not top of their game, or if teams feel understaffed, or they feel rushed, etc., that actually that whole customer experience can get knocked right. And I was reading in the report that there's quite a high percentage of customers who are noticing what I would say negative areas of experience, like waiting too long to be served, pubs being
Yep.
short staffed, service being rushed, staff seeming unsure, lacking in confidence, perhaps not had enough training, mistakes with orders. That has such a negative impact on customers. How do we make sure that our teams are as well prepared and as well trained as they possibly can be so that we can avoid any of those issues within the customer journey?
I think it starts with, great pub leaders always put their team, at the heart of their offer in terms of the connection points and how guests feel through the whole experience. That's their language. You can hear that. So yes, you need cross training, you need that flexibility, and then particularly now where pub teams are under pressure, right? Because people would like to employ more people than they are today, but there are huge financial limits on that, particularly the cost of employment. Nick's specifically has added such a premium now to employing people. And obviously, the national minimum wage for younger people is proving to start to be a bit of a barrier to those stepping on point jobs as well, which is heartbreaking for operators themselves who started exactly that role was their first job in a pub. But they start that conversation with how they want the guest to feel. It's not about transactional, and I think that's where the difference between really good and great pubs and those that maybe aren't hitting that limit, where they think it's about food and drink delivery. If it's about having a drink or being fed, there's lots of options available to customers now. It's so much more than that. That is an integral part, of course, but you want a great welcoming atmosphere. You've talked with some of your reports before about how important the atmosphere of the environment is as well that you're coming into. It is friendly, welcoming, and that connection. There's nothing worse than going to a pub. And feeling like you could just be anybody.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. You're just another person to serve, and it's under pressure when World Cup is a classic, right? So, but pubs and bars have been rammed, and that's been fantastic on one level. But it's so easy then to forget that every guest is still looking for that experience, even though there might be five deep at the bar, or there might be, a big list, in the kitchen of food waiting to go out. They still want that experience. They'll be forgiving if you engage them and you explain, if you just hold on a minute, so you're clearly a bit busy today, but
Yeah.
I'll be with you in a second. All those things that don't cost anything, but they do cost time and energy and attention by great pub operators. And I just feel that who we see that make a real difference, you'll go in and they'll all be sat around tasting the special for that day, or trying the new beer, or listening to the story behind a new offer,
Yeah.
because they want to get engaged. I mean, you and I, frequent these places, and I often go with, what are you most proud of on the menu, or what do you think's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
best thing you offer?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because I love great food and drink, but I'm not that precise. I'll take it. And
Yeah.
usually it's like, wow, because yeah, I tried it this morning. The chef, he's done something a bit special, and it's brilliant, right? So I think it's that authenticity and
Mm.
recognizing that it's a guest experience. It's not somewhere to just eat and drink.
You know what? As you were talking, I was just smiling because I was just remembering the CAM team on Thursday went to see the new Incipio sites
Yeah.
at Olympia. And I know it's not necessarily a pub, but we went into Lily's and we were served by this chap called Marvin. See, I even remember his name, 5 days on or whatever. And he was so passionate about the menu in Lily's that I could have listened to him all day. Like,
Mhm.
he was passionate, he was knowledgeable, he told us what he liked, he even told us what he didn't like, which sometimes I'm a bit, oh, I don't know if that's okay. But actually, on this occasion, he was absolutely right because we ignored him and we didn't like it either. I think that the point about service in a pub is you as you say, you can get all of the rest elsewhere, but we know that 29% of people will actively seek out to return to pubs that they know have great
Mm.
service. So it's not just about being nice and being kind and being friendly. It's actually about the bottom line as well, right?
Yeah, no, very much so. And also your return, as you said, but also your tolerance to things going wrong, or seeing that a pub is under pressure, because they are there. They can't just deliver the same level of service when there's five people in the bar, when there's 500 people in the bar and the garden and all the rest of it. Things have to change. But as long as you manage that expectation and you look after the guest as they are waiting, but all things are doable, right? All
Yes.
things are doable. And sometimes you also have to say no. And that's a really tough one right now, to turn people away. But, again, we see that within the operators that, think beyond taking the money in the short term, knowing they don't want to give a substandard service and they'd rather manage that. But
Mm.
it's a bit, sorry, we can't look after you today, but we'd love to see you tomorrow, and maybe give them incentive to come back at another time as well, because it's not worth it giving a substandard experience, because unfortunately we're great as individuals, but we'll go off and tell lots of people the bad news,
Yeah.
sometimes less people the good news.
Yeah.
And you just got to recognize that as well. But it does come back to, I think, planning from the center out about what is it like? What does it feel like to be a guest coming through? And I mean, Joe and Flo, if I pick on these guys from the Tolly, have
Yeah.
won so many awards now as well, and presented the recent awards show, which is great to see. But they do these experience days where they'll take their team out to a pub near them that's won a big award, to see what they're doing, and they'll go
Mm.
and sit
Mm.
there and have a great experience. But they'll be really looking at the details, where they go,
Yeah.
"That's really clever. Let's take that and build that in." Or actually, they're a little bit weak there. We can do more than them in that space. And I think that's just so important to recognize. It is all about the feel, and everything from literally the car park or the walk through the front door
Mhm.
all the way through to what does it feel like, when you exit. And, the great operators in the World Cup were talking about the next big thing that's happening in that pub to the
Yeah,
guests when they were there for the World Cup.
yeah,
They weren't just letting them leave, particularly some of them that hadn't been there for a while. And this was their reason to come
yeah,
back to the pub.
yeah,
Just remind, oh, we'll see you next week. What a great, got a pub quiz on, or there's a
yeah,
pottery session, depends on what community groups resonate with them, but leaving them in no doubt there's something for you again. So
yeah.
so see you soon.
Well, Mr. Katie and I actually did exactly that. We went to watch the England game in a pub called the Talbot in Brockley, Southeast London, which is where we live. And we started chatting to for two or three of the team members actually. By the time we left after the football, we had booked in for their steak night in a few weeks' time for a
Brilliant.
start. So all of these things, and that is not a regular place that we go. That is just because they were
Mm.
showing the football. It was the right area for us, and we could get a seat. So I think it's really important that the teams engage the customers, but it's also very important that the management, I suppose, or the leadership engage the teams. And I find it hard to believe, but from the research that we did with you, around 20% of managers in the pub industry have never done any formal people management or leadership training. That seems bonkers to me.
It's not a great surprise. I think again, we're a great environment where you can come in at entry level and get promoted through the ranks really rapidly, and a lot of that comes from your ability to create connections with guests and how you deliver and get your head around what is a complex business. And so you show those early signs, you can end up in those supervisory or those managerial roles really quickly. And sometimes maybe those foundations of how do you coach and direct a team, and they're very different, right? Sometimes there's a time where the place is under intense pressure and it's a bit more directive. And there's other times where you can be a bit more reflective and say, right, how could you handle that differently or what went particularly well, and having that conversation. So not just letting people come on again for a transactional shift,
Mhm.
and say thanks very much and off they go, but using every shift as an opportunity. And some of the better operators, they'll review it in real time. They don't wait for the big review if it's Google reviews or whatever platform that they're looking at, but they're doing it within shift. They're catching it
Mhm.
before it becomes a problem, because you don't want a whole evening to go by if you could have caught something when it starts to fall away. But again, having a good leader and manager be able to see the wood for the trees and put their head up,
Yeah.
when they're incredibly busy, and go, well, hold on, we've got a problem here. Let's just pause, take a breath,
Yeah.
calm everybody down and go again. So it isn't a great surprise, but it's something that is very fixable. And
Yeah.
those foundations, if it's a short-term qualification or there's some great apprenticeship schemes, and the government, I'm sure we'll touch on, have put some initiatives in place to make them more accessible and more funded, particularly for the kind of under 25s as well. So there's lots of opportunities for development.
Mm.
And don't take away from the network in terms of mentoring and coaching that we have within our own sector. We've got some brilliant leaders, even within our own membership offer we have for team members with workforce. We have some mentors within that who are award-winning operators that you can go and ask, how do I tackle this particular issue? So we're all learning, right? And look, there's nothing more dynamic or fast-paced than a busy, complex pub environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, then, Steve, we are speaking on the day when we have our fifth Prime Minister in 4 years. Mr. Andy Burnham, I believe, is as we speak, becoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Um, so speaking of staff changes and team challenges, what do we foresee with a new Prime Minister and where his priorities might be with regards to our industry?
Look, personally, we're hopeful. And Andy
Always.
has got a good track record of always hopeful, but we've got reason to be hopeful because he has a track record in Manchester. Manchester has risen, and again, I know we've both been out and about in Manchester, and it's a brilliant
I
experience.
love
And
it.
the understanding is that great hospitality develops great communities, and the regeneration of that city and the high streets and areas of the city that were incredibly run down,
Oh yeah.
almost derelict,
Yeah.
have been brought back to life. But you need vibrant hospitality, you need footfall, you need people in. That supports retail. He's got residential in there as well. So he understands creating an environment where businesses can invest importantly and
Mm.
and grow. So I think he's got a really good handle on that. is going to have a really busy agenda. But the one ask I would ask of him is, to really use us as the driver of growth. And there's some big issues he's got. One is, youth unemployment, particularly these million, young people who are not in educational training or employment. And we can be the solution to that. We know, we do that incredibly well. We don't need an initiative. All we needed to do is release the pressure on the businesses and allow us the ability to afford to build the teams that we really need. And I was talking to a couple of operators the other day, and if we got the VAT cut that we're all pushing for right now, and that's in line with Europe, so down to that 10% level, the first thing they would do is employ another person in their team
Yeah.
because they desperately need them.
Yeah.
And that would be a young person, and that would be, another
Yeah.
start of a career pathway for somebody. So that's one. I think the second is we are the window onto the high streets and communities in terms of the health of those areas. If hospitality isn't thriving, those communities and high streets aren't thriving. So this is an investment in something that is going to have not just direct impact into the growth of our own sector, but the impact we have on the foundational economy more broadly in that area. Because again, you come back to look at the areas of if it's London or Birmingham or Manchester or Liverpool that have been regenerated. Hospitality is at the heart of their regeneration, creating those safe, warm, inclusive spaces for people to come to. And whilst they're there, they shop, connect, live, stop, and all the things in between. So I am hopeful he gets it. The VAT ask is the single biggest thing that will make the difference because it would put money straight back in the business. And that's for all, revenues that come into hospitality. So it's food and drink.
Hmm.
And it would be a real shot in the arm. And the vast majority of operators would invest it.
Hmm.
This is, I think, sometimes that's misunderstood within this conversation. They would grow their teams. They would
Yeah.
do that vital investment to keep those pubs relevant and fresh. And demand is not the challenge at the moment. We have full pubs. I mean, the Sun, the World Cup. Hopefully the summer ahead. People, come to the pub to connect,
Yeah.
and that bit is clear. But having a fair opportunity to convert that into a sustainable living for operators, particularly independent operators, many that live above the pub, it is only about being fair.
Yeah.
Because right now it isn't. And if you look at the industry stats we had from our joint trade body surveys not so long ago, 25% are making a loss right now. One in four, pubs are making a loss, and one in six fear that they're going to close their business in the next 12 months if nothing changes.
Mm.
So it's not just about the positive we can unlock, which is getting loads more people into employment, get investment going, get that regeneration of, local high streets and communities, which we know Andy Burnham is passionate about,
Mm.
but also stop that failure, stop that, because it's not just a failure of a small business, it's somebody's, livelihood. For many, it's their home. They have to move out of the area,
And the
their kids
knock-on
out of
effect to the
schools.
people that supply them and their children who
Absolutely.
are local. And yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's huge. So yes, there is a jeopardy. We're losing two venues a day at the moment, and a lot of them are unnecessary failure of long-standing businesses. But it's about kickstarting the agenda that we know that Andy Burnham particularly is very passionate about, which is, I say, high streets and communities and employment, particularly for our young people, to give them that stepping on point. And we're the solution to both. So, work with us fairly, and then in a sense you can look at the broader agenda that he's got, which is complicated, but he knows, given us that fair taxation, he can leave us alone to do what we do brilliantly, which is just to grow.
And if anybody hasn't already signed the petition or supported it, where can they find it? We'll obviously link to it in the notes as well.
Yeah, if you go to that'stheproblem.co.uk, you can sign up. Really important that everybody signs up in the industry, but it's friends, it's family, it's team members, it's suppliers, it's all customers in the pub. And just a few weeks ago, we launched the second phase of that campaign, obviously spearheaded by Tom Kerridge. And it's
Oh,
all
wow.
about getting customers on board now. And we've had
Yeah.
some brilliant ambassadors who've had, all of their customers on quiz night all sign up to it together and say, we're back in our local, we're back in fair VAT at
Yeah.
10%. And also on there, there's a shop that gives you lots of assets that you
Great.
can order or just download the digital assets, so you get posters, beer mats, t-shirts, anything and everything to engage. And it's a fairness piece. This is not about a handout. We're just saying if you are invested in hospitality, as many countries in Europe are, this is what it looks like, and it looks like fair VAT. And
Yeah.
then we'll do everything else.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. I must say that I don't think my friends or family have ever known as much about VAT in hospitality than they have learnt in about the last 3 to 4 weeks. So thank you so much for joining me. Anybody out there, please do jump onto that website, support hospitality, support your local communities. Thank you for coming back on again, Steve.
My pleasure.